Welcome everyone to another Spotlight session. We are very privileged to welcome Zandra Moore today, who is the CEO and joint founder at Pan Intelligence. Firstly, Zandra, welcome to Spotlight.
Thank you very much for having me. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, very cool. So Zandra is actually, Pan Intelligence is a leading business intelligence and analytics software developer. And we're going to touch on this later. It'll probably be the last topic we talk about, which is the no-code movement, which I was really intrigued on when we started to talk about that. But prior to working at Pan Intelligence, Zandra also owned her own software consulting business and has over 20 years experience working in the technology sector, similar to myself in that way. So Zandra has over 20 years experience working in the technology sector, and a passion for enabling businesses to drive performance through data, insights and analytics is highly infectious. Zandra also founded a range of local B2B networking groups, including Lean In Leads, which will give a bit of a takeaway on where Zandra is based, which is a networking group of over 800 professional women in the North area, Zandra, I believe. So there's three key areas that we're going to touch on, and it's really the first topic I'd like to kick off with. But the three areas we're really going to touch on today with Zandra today is Zandra is very proactive in promoting women, especially in the technology industry. And being in 20 years in the technology industry, I'm highly passionate about this topic. But it's not just the actual gender side, also equality around disabilities and other areas of quality inside the technology industries as well. So Zandra would love to touch on that, but there's two other areas we're also going to touch on, which is around Gen Z, which we're also very passionate about because we're talking about even the generation beyond that with our children. But the idea of emotional capital, the idea of reevaluating the balance and the responsibility that's on us as leaders to get this piece right. And I'm really keen to talk about that. And the other one was the passionate one for the technology industry, which I share this passion with Zandra, which is the no-code movement and what that means to our industry moving forward. So again, Zandra, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to having a conversation with you.
Wow, so much to talk about. Let's crack on.
Well, let's start. The word infectious for me is I'm passionate about it, and the idea of what you're talking about in relation to inequality and what that means to you and how you see that playing, especially in the technology industry. I'd love to touch on that.
Yeah, it's an area that I think we're very acutely aware of in the tech sector, mainly because there's such a huge demand now for talent. The technology industry's had a huge injection of capital in the last 18 months. COVID has actually triggered, in particular, to this sort of SaaS industry that I think, we all operate in, yourselves and us. We've seen that capital drive a surge in demand for talent and obviously a cost of that talent as well. And yet we're still failing to attract, a wide proportion of the population into the industry. I mean, in the UK, I think we have 17% of the tech sector are women. For a new industry, that's pretty shocking. Yeah. And the pipeline is still struggling, right? So girls are most likely to drop out of the kind of sciences and technical disciplines before they choose their options or GCSEs here in the UK. So they are as competent and capable and enjoy the subjects, but seem to get it to a point where maybe they don't see themselves around the table in the classroom, or don't see themselves in the teaching staff, or just don't have the role models in industry to aspire to, and don't therefore pursue those subjects and those careers. So we're not doing a good enough job attracting a diverse pipeline. And I don't think it's just about gender either. I mean, gender is probably the first challenge, just because it's 50% of the population, but it is about making sure we have everybody at the right age, stage, different backgrounds and cultures, because we build better products at the end of the day with the most diverse group of people around the table deciding if those products suit everyone. So we've got to get that right, I think. But actually, it's a worthwhile problem solving with such a challenge in the pipeline of talent right now. So lots of ideas on that, I think.
Yeah, well, let's touch on a couple of those ideas. I mean, next gen leaders, what we're doing here on Spotlight is around, it's not leaders, experienced leaders, or leaders who are in leadership new, or the idea it covers all bases of aspirational leaders and everyone. And I'm a firm believer that everyone is their own CEO, right? So we're all leaders in our own right, because we're the ones who wake up, walk forward and aspire to do things. Everyone does. So if you could give some advice to a leader when talking about this particular topic that you're incredibly passionate about, what are some of the help that you could give us to make sure that we're factoring in our future planning, but we're putting the steps in play to make sure that this does get right?
And I love what you've just said, by the way, because I think it starts with the individual. And I think we need to ask ourselves what stops that diverse pipeline walking towards us and this industry, and what barriers perhaps are we unintentionally creating to allow that to be accessible to everybody. But it also starts with the individual and how they sort of see themselves in that ecosystem. So the two things, I mean, we'll come on to Leading Leads. Part of the reason I set up that network is to help women to challenge themselves about their own barriers that they create to their own success, right? What are the conversations we have with ourselves that are actually self-limiting beliefs? Yes, there's some bias in industry, but there's also stuff that holds us back in the way we think, the way we see ourselves, and perhaps not leaning in and pushing ourselves into opportunities in the same way perhaps men do, frankly. And there is a difference. But as leaders in industry, I think we have to challenge ourselves. Are we fishing in diverse ponds and pools? So are we really reaching into the sources of talent pipeline that will give us that diverse mix? So we work with a whole range of I was going to say no code then. Yes, we do work in no code, but we work with our
one day.
North coders as opposed to no coders. North coders is a really, really good example of an organization that retrains people mid-career to come into coding. As a result, it attracts a really diverse group of people. Women, people at different age and stage. So retrainees, looking at working with organizations like I work with Founders for Schools. So as a leader, be seen as a woman in tech. Go and talk to kids before they take their options in schools. Tech is a place for everyone. So as leaders, I think we can reach into the education pipeline and be visible, especially those of us that are the diverse leaders. But as leaders that perhaps not diverse, go and reach into the organizations which actually are building those talent pipelines and really work closely to understand what you can do. So a very simple one is make sure that your job descriptions and job specs are written so that they appeal as much to, a woman as a man, as somebody that feels that this is a place for them. If they have a disability, that maybe they don't see themselves in that job description as being a place for them. But yeah, lots of things I think you can do. Lots.
Oh, I love this. And it's interesting what you're saying about the education side, because my daughter, who was probably 10 at the time, she's at a girls' school, and they actually got somebody in to do an entrepreneurial day. And they had to create something. They had to build an app, and then they had to get together as a group, and they had to all have the idea, and they all contributed. Then they had to present back. And when she's telling me this is a 10-year-old child telling me this, I went, oh my God, you're a future CEO. You just have it, and she could remember it all. And so the skill set that she was being given so young will hopefully allow her to just not see the barriers that are potentially there when she goes into the workforce. So the other side of that equation as well, and I'll send it to you, and I recommend the viewers to have a look at. Suzanne's story is a very accomplished executive here in Australia. She's worked for all of our top brands as a leading female executive in all of those companies. And when I was talking to Suzanne, it was very much around, there was no peers, or there was no one I could really look up to, in that I was a first. But that's not the real revelation. The revelation was, because she was a first, she felt like she had to be a certain way. And she really had to go internal to look at the way that she was acting and behaving. And then once she understood it, she just elevated another 2 or 3 levels. It was amazing. And she was articulating this, and it was a really cool. So I'll send it to you. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Thank you. That was amazing.
So Jen, let's talk about Gen Z then. Because you talked about 2 things, the emotional capital, the reevaluating the balance, but then really the third thing is, we can't just put them to the side and categorize them. We have to take responsibility of really helping this generation come through and flourish. So I'd love to learn a little bit more from you about that.
It's only because I have kids who are 16 and 13, and I think the reality of their expectations for themselves is very different than it was for me. And I think they are just so much better versed because of the access to information through the devices they've had in their hands since they were a baby, right? And frankly, they have been exposed to more ideas and more values-led principles that perhaps you were only in your small community of perhaps your family, that, you know, they have high expectations for us as leaders, and they have high expectations of, and they have a real sense of, you know, well, I'm worth it, right? They've got a lot of positive messaging. There's not all good, right? We all know that social media and all this stuff has a dark side to it, but I actually think there is a lot of good that's come out of empowering these young people to want better for themselves and to challenge. So that's a good thing. I think that's what will change organizations, society for the best, and will challenge ideas to make sure they represent, you know, provide outcomes that benefit everyone as opposed to a minority. So I do think it's all good, but just create a challenge for us as leaders, right? Because they come into this workplace with, I mean, I hear this phrase entitlement, and I would like to challenge that. People call them snowflakes, say they're entitled. I actually think that's wrong. We're putting these badges on these young people that are actually true to their values. And I think the core to building really successful businesses in the future is as much about leveraging that kind of strength of emotional capital, recognizing the individual, building teams where everybody can bring their whole self to work, right? So strengths, I don't know if you've heard of Gallup's strengths leadership, but we work on a strengths leadership principle here, which is you build a role around a person, not a person around a role. So you understand their core strengths, you identify their weaknesses and gaps, and you fill those gaps in the team with people. So really about individual strengths. And I think if you start focusing on values and strengths and the individual and enable them to bring their whole self to work, you build a huge amount of emotional capital. You build teams that really love being together because they have their place in that, they know their place, they feel understood, valued, and they can play to those strengths that they are in their flow, right? People talk about flow. Get people into that flow state. It's super powerful. And that emotional capital, I think, can carry you through more. The last 2 years of the pandemic have been tough, but I genuinely place the amount of emotional capital that we have built up in this business by focusing on the individual, values-led culture, a strengths approach to managing teams and people has carried us through that successfully, because, you know, it's not just about financial capital. It's not just about, you know, intellectual capital or knowledge or network. It is emotional capital. So these guys are going to come with a high expectation on being able to leverage that. And we need to see the value in that and the businesses we can build around it, because I think actually what we'll have are better businesses and better teams anyway. It's just a bit different. We valued a lot around kind of financial capital in the last maybe 20 plus years in this industry.
This is an awesome conversation, because I mean, I could give you some really good examples of just some of our clients who have been able to engage that new, call it new generation, right? The new hires and that. And the time to productivity has just been phenomenal, right? Because once they understand where we're going as a company, once they understand, hey, this is the 1 to 3 year plan, hey, but we're going to work here, they're in, right? They're okay.
All in, right?
Right, I understand that. I can go back to it and review it. But then when they get working, they can just go move. And we've had people productive in an hour or two working across 5 countries. Like just amazing. And I look at that screen and go, my goodness, if I could have done that so many years ago, instead of trying to work out who's who, what am I doing, where's my laptop? Okay, yeah, fine. They are really that competent, but they want to know the context a bit more. And I think that's that value piece. And I just want to touch on that a little bit more. So the idea of this generation coming through, the Gen Z and the back end of the millennials, I guess, is what's your take on their buy-in to company values and direction and things like that? Is that an instant connection, or is that something that's built over time through trust? Because the generation has shifted a little bit more on the way that they look at tenure, right? That's a given. But that's, as I'm with you, that's okay. We should be okay with that, because if they're not happy, they're not going to be their best selves, right? So what's your thought on that? And how's the best way to actually, as a leader, to embrace it?
I mean, you only know what you know, right? So I operate in a way that is authentic to who I am. And I've only learned perhaps over time that perhaps some of the ways I approach building teams is part of that. And I think the way that I've approached building teams, I think is working for us and helps this generation to engage is we're very, very, very visible, very transparent. So we have whole company meetings every Friday, and we go through everything from how much cash is in the bank, right the way through to, there is complete transparency. The leadership team, the directors of this business, are not just visible, they are incredibly engaged at all levels and approachable. So, and we wear our hearts on our sleeves. We there is no kind of, if there is a moment where we feel, both me and my co-founder Ken, he's an emotional guy too, and we get upset, we'll cry in front of our staff and say, do you know what, this either thank you or sorry, apologize, take accountability, call things out and don't hide them. When things are not right, bring them in. So the way that I see them feeling valued is they're used to having access to information. They're used to being able to choose what they want to do. They have a lot more choice perhaps than we had, a lot more choices perhaps than we had. So you have to give them the information so because that's what they're used to, and that feels good and safe for them. They feel trusted, they feel heard, but also they need to see your values, and they need to be able to connect with those values. They can't be pieces of paper or words written on a wall or on your website. They've got to feel it and see it. And if they don't feel it and see it, they will disconnect from that. So there is something about, and I can only talk about how we operate here and perhaps what I believe are the things that work for us, but visibility, transparency, authenticity, openness, and just not being afraid to be emotional in front of your team. They want to connect with you. They want to be part of something. They want to feel it, right?
I love that. I love it. You talk about a lot of that stuff around authenticity. You didn't have to say that word. You can just feel it. So I'm getting this infectious feel from you right now. I'm getting really, I'm riding with you right now. But the other side to that equation that I really liked, which is everyone has strengths and weaknesses. And I noticed you didn't say the word weakness up front. You talked about strengths, which was cool. But then the idea is, well, we either, one, we understand them to be able to either agree that it's a weakness that, hey, I want to invest time in and put a plan to fix. Or what you also said, which is now let's just rally people around those areas or those skill sets that they're really good at. And together we can do some pretty amazing things.
Completely. Be okay with your weaknesses. That's vulnerability, right? So part of authenticity is being okay with your vulnerability. So being okay with the fact I'm not very good at this, giving it a voice, being okay to say I'm not very good at this, and everyone around you, okay, how can I help, is a cultural thing, right? So if you allow people to be their authentic selves, bring their whole self to work, it's about not just acknowledging what they're great at, it's also them being honest with themselves about what they're not great at and asking for support. Asking for help. Again, some people need encouraging to do that because they think it's a personal sign of failure, or that it might be too risky, and that might cause them to have people judge them differently. People have got to feel safe, and safety is telling people that's okay. You can have weaknesses as well as strengths, and don't worry, we'll work with you to work around that. And it's amazing what you do when you have a fail fast culture where people feel they can say honestly, I'm not good at this, or that doesn't feel right, or that doesn't work. Is what they do is they get to the solution faster because someone goes, okay, I can help you. And therefore they innovate and iterate, and people are not kind of afraid to say things. The minute you have that kind of fear in your culture, you do lock back innovation, agility, creativity. It's tough.
I love it. And you're going back to something you said earlier. It's about the leadership and the way the leader acts, right? And the way the leader is to what they potentially get out of the team. I had an example today. I was talking to my one of my team, and I said to Yash, I said, you know what, I'm struggling with this thing. I mean, my tenure is much more, but I'm struggling. You know what she said to me? She was amazing. She goes, Marty, you need inspiration. I think you should listen to these two things. And I went, you know what? That's exactly what I need. And I did. I got off the phone, I listened to her, I said, oh, goodness, that was it. And she actually helped me get rid of this mental block. I did. And that's just love it. And so the other thing too is when we talk about innovation and ideas and what we're good in, the idea of giving everyone that level of transparency of what everyone is doing allows us to also look at other areas that we're even quietly or silently passionate about. And we haven't quite worked out what it is yet, but hey, Zandra, I'd love to get involved in that. You're doing that. That's really cool. It's not my 9-to-5 gig, but I'll put a bit of extra effort into that. And if we can give them that environment, they'll go for it. Right, they'll put all of their blood, sweat, and tears into it because they just love that piece of the business. And everyone loves helping somebody else. Everyone loves helping people.
They do, and you know, at the end of the day, a real core human dimension is we just want to feel valued and do things that feel of value, right? And if people feel valued for who they are and they're not trying to change themselves to fit a role or a culture. And if they can also feel that they're doing stuff that they love and it is valued, you know what, really core to most human kind of productivity, motivation, and happiness is that kind of stuff, really. Not easy to get right, but I do think this next generation are really going to challenge that, and we're going to have to sort of embrace it and make it happen for them. So.
And you and I are living it every day. It's a roller coaster. Woo!
It's a mad, which it is.
Oh, man.
Yeah, but you know what? I would be bored doing anything else.
But you know what? I think that's one thing that's going to transpire out of all of this with the Gen Z. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
It's just every day has got a little bit of a twist that's moving in a different direction. And because they do have access to all those resources and they do have access, and it's no longer you just know you said it earlier, what you've been told. You know, basically influenced by everything that's happening in the global market.
And more choices as well, right? More access to
exactly right.
to choices, and totally.
Well, even the idea of travel, like when the pandemic and allows everybody to travel, I always saw a world, about 5 years ago, I saw a world where this generation would just say, you know what, full-time 9-to-5 for me, it doesn't make any sense. But if I could work and travel and do things, I'll still do the 9-to-5. It'll just be within my framework. And therefore, it's going to be up to us to build an area that was a safe space for people to get work done. It didn't matter where they lived or where we led from. And that creation it's what's happening right now with the pandemic, I guess. So let's talk about no code movement, because you got my attention. And I immediately went back to the software, Salesforce, no software movement way back when, right? So let's talk about that. What does that mean to you?
Oh, do you know, it was a bit of a happy accident, really. So we're a no-code, low-code platform. So no code for our end users, which means they don't have to be a data scientist to build cool stuff in data, and low code for our customers who are software businesses who are wanting to just accelerate their roadmap super fast without having to build this stuff themselves. So we've had this kind of lens on the world for 10 years now, but we never called it no code, right? Because this isn't new. WordPress is kind of no code for website building, and Access is no code for building. You know, this stuff has been around. It's just got a new badge on it. But when I started to hear this phrase being used in the States to describe really what our business was, I was like, that's it. That feels right now. And actually, Bubble, Webflow, all of these amazing tools that were starting to get mass adoption. 18 months ago, I was like, no one's talking about this in the UK, right? No one gets this. Every time I mention no code, people just look at you and go, so you don't have any lines of code in your product? I'm like, no, we have lines of code. And then there was a lot of fears that I heard coming back. Oh, this is a new fad. Oh, what does this mean for IP? Do I own my IP? Our business is going to value us if we build our platform on no code. All I heard was fear. And I thought, wow, we've got to lean into this, because I genuinely believe the next acceleration in technology innovation is having no-code technologies that talk to each other to quick spin up solutions to problems, in hours, right? With everybody in society, because you don't have to be a developer. So you suddenly unlock the whole ecosystem to suddenly become builders of digital solutions to problems. And as long as this stuff can really start to talk to one another, can spin up and you can build anything, right? It can be anything really, really fast. And, we've benefited in the last 10 years as SaaS vendors from having, AWS and GCP and Azure reduce the cost of kind of storage and platforming our solutions. And that has sort of lowered a barrier of entry, but not far enough, because we've still got this big digital skills pipeline challenge with not enough dev resources to support the kind of demand and capitalization of our sector. The no code is kind of a solution to that too. But God, it's so exciting. So I set this up as a network 18 months ago, and I was like, cool, let's start to educate people and find people from the US and wherever that are doing cool stuff in no code, educate people here in the UK. And it'll help me to get my message out there about why our tech is going to be like really key to enabling these developers to kind of do stuff fast. And it's just been mad. I mean, literally, people are approaching us every week. Can I speak on your event? Can I? Because it's now got that momentum. And, you know, only in the last month, I've introduced 3 startups to 3 no-code platforms and associated consultants that can build on those. And they reckon that these apps are going to be built within weeks.
Yeah.
And none of these people have ever built software before, right?
Yeah.
These are one's a financial accountant, the other one's an ex professional services. I think she was at Ernst & Young. And again, you know, a female CEO, a financial accountant, building digital solutions to problems that they faced and can see a need for. That's really cool. That will solve the diversity bit too, right?
Yeah,
does it all very
cool. Because I mean, the experience that I have from a business travel perspective, creating a broader ecosystem of integrations. It always laid with challenges of how do we actually ultimately answer the question.
Yeah.
So part of what we've done at Straight Up is really how do we simplify the workspace and not allow, not force people to go to 5, 6. We actually did a survey last year on LinkedIn that 37% of employees daily are going to 17 plus workspaces, 16 plus workspaces daily to do their job. You can't tell me everyone's aligned, everyone's working on the same, and everyone's energized and everyone's going here, where are we working? Right? How do we simplify that workspace and do it in a way that we also complement other great services? Right. So we have sort of a bit of I wouldn't say it's a no code movement per se, but it definitely is how do we simplify something that's very complex right now to allow everyone to rally around common themes and ideation, that flow and that sort of stuff. So with that, I'm going to wrap up because you and I could absolutely talk to the moon, and because you're a Leeds football supporter, and there's a lot of great Australians that have gone through the Leeds Football Club, like Harry Kuehl and Mark Viduka. Mark Burns, or Jacob Burns, Jacob Burns, also another great player that went through Leeds. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we depart? And really think about, I mean, love you to think about from a leadership perspective as you look at 22 and beyond. What are 2 or 3 things as leaders that we really need to factor in and consider, not just to bring our teams together and derive success, but also on a technology perspective?
Oh, it's a big question.
I'm
Thanks. Yeah, that's a really big question as well. Wow. Crikey, what are the 3 things we need to be thinking about as technology leaders? I do think we are seeing a shift, a massive shift in how people build solutions. I just, there's the remote working, but it has the capital that has flowed into our industry is changing the shape of it fast, really, really fast. So I think as leaders, we've got to be more tuned in than ever to what's going on in the industry. Really, the pace of it is crazy right now, and also therefore the talent that is sort of emerging around it, I think is. So I think there's that, which is a big responsibility to keep up with and quite a hard job, I think, for all of us. What do I really think of the challenge? Do you know what? I think we're all kind of resetting a little bit. The pandemic has changed so much about the industry, about how our teams and how our organizations operate, that I think we need to be giving ourselves the time to just observe what that change is really like and the benefits of it, and maybe some of the things which are not so good, right? Like you say, you've talked about distributed workplaces, and so I think there is we've been so in it. I know personally I've been so in it, kind of keeping everybody going and more communicating more than I've ever done with those teams. But I think it is now time that we can see this sort of emergence out of it, for us to step back and reassess Porter's 5 forces and some useful frameworks, right? To sort of step back and reassess what's changed, how's it changed, and what do those dynamics and forces mean for our teams, our culture, our strategy, and the market. I think we owe it to our teams really to do a little bit of that right now. I think.
Yeah.
I can't think of a third one. There's just too much. I've got too many ideas of things that I care about.
I think you covered two really good ones there, because I'd also say that not just tech leaders, but all leaders need to think about how they enable the frameworks for their teams to be successful. I see way too many times leaders just get given tools or email and a laptop and go, okay, I'm trying to do my best. And then they'll try and insert a tool because they think it's the right tool, and then potentially they've alienated themselves from the rest of the business. So it's really, how do we take responsibility to take ownership of that enablement framework? The plans tend to get set, right? We strategize and we plan and ideate, that sort of stuff. But it's now, how do we help everyone come along at the same speed?
And I have one last one.
Yeah, cool.
Because I think just reflecting on something that we did in the last, we set our values framework up when we spun the business up in 2014, and we redid that exercise last year, and we engaged every member of the company. And what was really brilliant is we've redone the values framework for the business, was the 3 core values that we had in place from the start bubbled up as still some of the strongest values across the business, that they had been reinforced and were repeated.
Yeah, wow.
We've changed it slightly, the framework, but what it did was validate that we were still reaching everyone in the organization.
Yeah.
So are you still reaching everyone? Now we're distributed. Now we don't see everybody every day. Now, are we still reaching everyone? And do they still feel like they're on the bus? And I don't think you can ever ask people enough to make sure they're with you. So yeah, that's for me, that was a really good exercise in, are we telling ourselves everyone's on the bus, or is everyone on the bus? And yeah that helped. Anyway, that's it.
I'm looking forward to going back on this and listening, because you truly you ooze authenticity. I love it. You do, and you obviously have a bigger purpose than yourself, clearly, in how you look at the world. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for sharing your journey, because it's a phenomenal journey, very successful in business, also very successful in the bigger purpose to life, and helping others as well, which is very, very cool. But I love your leadership style. It is very, very cool. And I think everyone who listens to this will take away those 3 or 4 key things. And what I'd love to see as well out of these is, when you're a really good leader, you can also acknowledge that there's some weaknesses. I like what you said. You don't always have to fix them. Acknowledge them and know that they're there, so we can actually rally around them and make sure we move it forward. But the idea is, if there is an area that you need to improve, whether it's through clarity, authenticity, purpose, whatever it is, there's an opportunity to move forward. It doesn't matter what stage of leadership you're at. And so I thoroughly thank you very much for sharing that journey with us, Zandra.
Oh, it's been an absolute joy, Martin. Thank you. You've been very kind to me today.
Take care.
Thank you.